Welcome to the next video on sentence diagramming. In the previous video, you learned about how to diagram adjectives, which are one kind of modifier that you'll find in our language. Remember, modifiers are just words that describe or give information about the main words that they modify. Okay, so we talked about how adjectives modify nouns and pronouns. And remember, the other part of speech that we have that modifies are adverbs. Okay, so adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. As a review, you had that in your part of speech unit. But now we're going to take a look at the way to diagram them, and you diagram them essentially the same way you diagrammed adjectives. They go on a slanted line under the word they modify. The only difference is, obviously, they're modifying different kinds of words. They're modifying verbs, adjectives, or adverbs. So we'll take a look at the 4 adverbial questions that adverbs answer about the words they modify. Remember, there happen to be 4 adjectival questions. We had what kind, which ones, how many, and whose. Well, now we have how, when, why, and where. And they are all the questions that an adverb would potentially answer about the verb, or sometimes adjectives or adverbs, that they're modifying. Okay, so let's just take a look at the sentence I ran. Hopefully we all remember that our subject goes first, right? And then we have a firewall, and ran is our verb here. It's an action. So we can see how these different questions are used to determine that it is in fact an adverb and it's modifying that verb ran. So we can say, I ran quickly. Quickly answers the question, how you ran, right? So just like in our last video for adjectives, an adverb will also go on a slant line. It just happens to go, as would make sense, under the verb because it's modifying or answering a question about the verb. How quickly, or how they ran quickly. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the second one. I ran recently. Recently doesn't answer a question how you ran. It answers a question when you ran. So when answers a question, or recently answers a question when you ran, it is also an adverb. Okay? Now, hopefully you're picking up on a pattern. Quickly and recently both end in ly. Now, it's not an absolute, but in the English language, you should pick up on a pattern. We take adjectives like quick, okay? An adjective, and we'll add an ly, and that'll turn it into an adverb. So a lot of times, if you notice a word ending in an ly, you can think to yourself, that's a signal. It's probably acting as an adverb, okay? And if it answers one of these adverbial questions, it in fact is. Now, just be cautious, though, because it's not an absolute. We have words like friendly. You know, she was friendly. Friendly is an adjective answering the question how she was, right? And it ends in an ly. But in general, we take adjectives, we add lys, they become adverbs. So look for that, okay? And they go on slanted lines under the verb that they're modifying, right? Now, how and when are examples have one word, but take a look at what happens when we look at the next 2 adverbial questions, why and where. The bolded and underlined part of those sentences, it's no longer just one word, as in quickly or recently, but it's what's called a phrase, right? A group of words. And these are, if you look at the little asterisks next to them, prepositional phrases. And we're going to learn about how to diagram prepositional phrases in the next video. And I don't want to confuse you. So I'm not going to show you at this point how to diagram prepositional phrases. But what I would like to point out is that sometimes these phrases act like adverbs. And we know they act like adverbs because they answer one of the adverbial questions. I ran for exercise answers the question why you ran, right? In the sentence, I ran to the store, a prepositional phrase, answers the question where you ran. So how, when, why, and where are all adverbial questions. And when we find words, or now phrases sometimes, that answer the questions how, when, why, or where, then you know it's an adverb. You know that that word or phrase is acting like an adverb, and it would go under the word that it's modifying. In this case, ran. Okay? So we're not diagramming them any differently than we would diagram adjectives. They're just going under other words in the sentence, the words that they modify. All right, now let's take a look at some examples where we have different kinds of adverbs, because the trick about adverbs is they're a little more versatile than adjectives. Remember, they don't just modify verbs, they also modify adjectives and other adverbs. So we'll see examples of that in our sentences, okay? So I'm going to scroll down and we'll take a look at 3 sentences. Thomas Edison worked diligently, Walter ran very quickly, and the shiny red car looked expensive. Okay? First, Thomas Edison. What is the sentence about? Hopefully you realize it's Thomas Edison. Now, from our previous video on adjectives, you might be wondering, well, why doesn't Thomas go under Edison? But it's not answering a question, which Edison. It's a proper noun. When we have proper nouns, we treat them like one person, place, or thing. Proper noun, in this case, a person. Thomas Edison is the subject. We don't need to put Edison or Thomas under Edison. All right? Now, what's our verb? What about Thomas Edison? He worked diligently. So worked is our verb, okay? Now we have that word diligently. What does diligently answer in the question? Hopefully you realize it's answering an adverbial question, one of the 4 we just went over. It's answering the question how he worked. He worked diligently. Notice it has an ly at the end, which is often an indicator that it's an adverb. So it goes on a slanted line under the word that it modifies, diligently. Okay, pretty simple. Now we're going to move on to the second example. Walter ran very quickly. Walter is my subject. Now, what about Walter? Like firewall. What about Walter? That's our predicate. What did he do? He ran very quickly. So that's our predicate. Ran being the simple predicate or the verb. Okay, so Walter ran. But now we have very quickly. Let's take quickly first. What is quickly answering about the sentence? Hopefully you realize, just like diligently in the previous sentence, quickly is answering the question how. How you ran. Okay, he didn't run slowly. He ran quickly. How did he run? Quickly. It goes under ran, and we write it on a slanted line. Pretty simple. Okay? Now, here's an interesting thing. We said that adverbs modify verbs, and in this case, quickly's modifying the verb ran. That's why it's underneath it. But they also modify adverbs and adjectives. So take a look at very. Ask yourself the question, what is very doing in the sentence? What question does it answer? It answers how quickly, very quickly, okay? So in essence, what this is doing is very is modifying or describing another adverb, because we said that quickly was an adverb. right? It has to be. It's underneath the verb on a slanted line. Quickly is an adverb. And therefore, it's one of the examples of how an adverb can modify or describe another adverb. So it's got to go on a slanted line, and it's got to go under what it's intended to modify, what it's describing, in this case quickly. But quickly is already a slanted line, so notice the line I made. It's this kind of branch line. And now it's slanted in the same way, and we write very on that line, okay? Very answers the question, how quickly? An adverb modifying another adverb. And quickly is an adverb modifying the verb ran. Okay? Pretty interesting. Let's move on to the third one. The third one will demonstrate yet another function of adverbs. Okay, so let's take a look at the shiny red car looked expensive. Well, hopefully you see that the sentence is about what? It's about the car. And then we link it to its verb, firewall. What is the verb in the sentence? What about the car? Well, it looked expensive. Looked being the verb. Now, this is something that kind of might throw some of you off. Is expensive a direct object? For expensive to be a direct object, it would have to be being acted upon by the subject, okay? So in other words, the expensive would have to be looked by the car. But the car isn't looking. It's not physically doing anything. It's not an action. Looked in this context is just like any of the state of being verbs we learned. Ism, are, be, was, were, is, if you remember that video. It's a state of being verb. It's showing, or a linking verb sometimes we call it. It's showing us that the car is something. The car is expensive. It looks expensive, but there's no action. So we don't need a vertical line. If you remember, after a linking verb, it's our third sentence pattern, we need a slanted line. And remember, if it is in fact a linking verb, what will follow will always be either an adjective or a noun. And in this case, we have an adjective, expensive. Car looked expensive. So that's why that line is slanted, okay? Now, when sentences get longer, I like to cross out what I've used to keep track. I think it's good practice. So car looked expensive, we cross it out. But now we have the shiny red, okay? Well, let's take a look at the shiny and red. The answers what question? Hopefully you realize it answers the question, which car? So it's not an adverb, but an adjective, because it's answering the question, which car? And car, obviously the subject of our sentence, is a noun, okay? Now, red answers the question, what? Hopefully you realize another adjective. It answers the question, what kind of car? Not a blue car, not a yellow car, it's a red car, okay? So that's another adjective modifying the noun, car. But here's the trick. I'm going to cross those out. What do we do with this? What is shiny answering? It's answering what question about the sentence? It's not answering the question about the car. It's answering a question about red. And red is an adjective, we just said. An adjective describing a noun. So it's answering the question, how red? Shiny red. So therefore, it's an adverb. Adverbs modify, remember, verbs, adverbs, and adjectives. In this case, it's an adverb modifying an adjective, okay? Answering the question, how red? So just like in our previous example, because it's modifying another modifier, it needs to kind of go on this branch, okay, and come out on a slanted line from the slanted line that red's on. This is how you modify or diagram adverbs. Thanks for watching.